All right, so hello. So we're taking a look at a video, The Loss of Life in World War One Visualized. So this video was inspired by Neil's video, the ones about World War Two, which I had made my reaction or commentary about. So we are going to watch this and talk about it. I do have I'll say my expertise is roughly in World War One. Obviously, I know a lot about World War Two and stuff, but we're gonna give this a shot. Hopefully, I don't talk too much. Again, the original video is in the description. If you want to watch a 10-minute video, please go watch that video there. I will probably be pausing a lot to discuss whatever we are discussing, so the losses and where they particularly hurt. So, without further ado, let's get to it.
This video is made possible by Skillshare. Learn anything you want to learn with Skillshare for free for 2 months at skl.sh/reallifelore18. I purposefully released this video on the 9th of November 2018. 2 days from now, on the 11th of November, will mark exactly 100 years since the end of the First World War, one of the most destructive and violent wars ever fought in human history. While the Second World War and the destruction it caused often overshadow the First World War, I felt like now would be a good time to remember and visualize the enormous loss of life that the Great War caused. We'll be counting soldiers and civilians separately, as well as deaths and injuries separately. A casualty can be a confusing statistic in war because it means that a soldier has been taken out of action, but not necessarily killed. Each of these models represents 1,000 people who died or went missing, while each of these models represents 1,000 people who were injured, which when combined equal the number of casualties.
That is a very good explanation on casualties. That's basically just perfect. So usually depends, you can become a casualty. So like, for example, for the battle, Stalingrad has 1 million casualties. That doesn't mean 1 million people died. That means 1 million people were either injured or died. That does not count the injured also can come back if they're not, severely injured enough. So that's just a fact there. And the fact that it's released on the 9th of, I'm assuming this is going to be a 2018 video, but the 9th of November is 2 days before the 11th of November, which we all know, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of the year of our Lord, 1918, is when the First World War officially ended. Now, you can see the 11s all line up. That's no mistake. A lot of people had to die to get that to happen. Let's just put it this way. There was a ceasefire that was agreed in the morning. The war could have stopped there, or at least paused. But that didn't happen. They had to make it all 11s.
When combined equal the number of casualties. And we'll begin the counting with the United States. Over 116,000 soldiers died, and another 204,000 were injured fighting against the Germans and Austrians on the Western Front. This amounted to 0.17% of the American population at the time becoming a casualty of war. But America only fought for a little over a year between 1917 and 1918. The war had already...
That is true. Now, okay, so something of this casualty, I'm not sure, but these casualty numbers can also come from the Spanish flu. We lost a lot of U.S. soldiers because of Spanish flu, which, fun fact, didn't come out of Spain, came out of the United States, but that's a different topic. But not an insignificant amount of the dead and casualties that we took in World War I were due to the Spanish influenza.
The war had already been going on for over 2.5 years before that. So let's take a look at some of the countries who were fighting from the beginning. The war began when Austria-Hungary declared war against Serbia in 1914, and Serbia suffered worse than any other country during the war. 375,000 Serb soldiers lost their lives in the fighting, while another 625,000 civilians died from famine and disease. That amounted to over 22% of the Serbian population dying during the 4-year-long war.
And that's around 1 million people for a small country as Serbia. Serbia hit well above their weight in World War I for what they had to endure. And they took 22% of their population just outright died. You can see that these scars of war, they echo in World War II, and they still really echo today. Again, a lot of these people, so the soldiers, okay, the 300,000 soldiers, all were men. I'm confident in saying they basically all were men. Might have been a few females, but all were men. All these men, young men really, would not have children because they're dead. That would leave generations of less people, and that continues. And Serbia took 22% of their entire population died so that they could basically hold on to their country.
More than 1 out of every 5 people in the country. Serbia was a member of one of the 2 alliances that fought against one another in the war called the Entente, which also included the United Kingdom, France, Russia, Italy, America, and many others, all of whom would suffer terribly. The United Kingdom would send over 815,000 soldiers to their graves, like on the first day of the Battle of the Somme, in which 19,000 would die in only 24 hours, the bloodiest single day in British history. Over 123,000 British civilians also lost their lives during the war, totaling up to just over 2% of the British population, or about 1 in every 50 people dying.
As they said, this is around 800,000 British personnel, soldiers died.
18,000 soldiers to their graves, like on the first day of the battle, would send over 815,000 soldiers.
815,000 soldiers, okay? I want you, as a perspective on this, that is more than they lost combined in World War II, both civilian and military. The World War I for Britain, the United Kingdom, was absolutely devastating. This, along with France, which we'll probably get to, is one of the reasons that Britain was very apprehensive, and Neville Chamberlain was also very apprehensive about getting into another war like this, because the amount of people died in the United Kingdom's population was astronomical.
Dying, but many more were wounded. 1,675,000 more soldiers, which adds together to 5.77% of the UK population then, becoming casualties of the war, subjects of the British Empire like Australia.
Think about that. 5% of the United Kingdom's wounded or became a casualty. Almost 6% of their entire population. That is a massive amount of people.
Subjects of the British Empire like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, India, and South Africa also fought in the war and took high casualties. Percentage-wise, New Zealand suffered the worst, losing 3.8% of her population as wartime casualties, while numbers-wise Australia took the hardest hit, losing over 61,000 of her soldiers and suffering another 152,000 wounded, with Canada.
And this is all volunteer, okay? Australia was one of the nations that was able to keep itself in an all-volunteer force. The soldiers did not want conscription. The units that were already in theater did not want conscription because they did not want somebody else a conscript. Conscription was a very hot issue in Australia, and they did not do it for World War I.
Of her soldiers and suffering another 152,000 wounded.
That all volunteers. Just think about that.
With Canada and India both not too far behind. But the other major Entente powers lost an incredible amount more. The Italians joined the war in 1915, but in 3 years of fighting suffered 555,000 military fatalities, along with 592,000 civilian deaths. Another 947,000 Italian soldiers became wounded, representing 5.8% of the Italian population becoming casualties.
This is, again, this echoes all the way into World War II. Allah, I will fight you to the death. The 13 battles of the Isonzo did not have to happen the way they did, which leads to a lot of these Italian soldiers that have to die. You can go check my video out on what I think about that. But again, they paid a heavy price for, I mean, really, they got very, very little out of World War I for what they paid.
A figure roughly comparable to the UK percentage. But then there's Russia and France, both of whom suffered higher casualties than the entire Serbian population combined during the war. Russia was the first country to come to Serbia's defense during the war and suffered catastrophic losses. 1,977,000 soldiers died fighting against the Central Powers, while another 1,140,000 civilians lost their lives. But Russia suffered vastly higher injuries. 4,350,000 soldiers were wounded during the fighting, which together represents 2.5% of the Russian population that became casualties.
And this really, Russia is an example of one of the countries besides Germany, which we'll get to. Russia is one of the examples of World War One where these casualty numbers seem extreme and ludicrous, but these double to triple in World War II with 30 million is what we estimate deaths. It can go a lot higher. Again, this is catastrophic for Russia at this point in time, and you can the amount of dead for what they gained and what they were continuing to do is what eventually leads to the October Revolution of 1917.
Became casualties. These enormous losses eventually helped contribute to Russia's spiral into revolution and their surrender in the war early into 1917. But percentage-wise, the Allied country that suffered during the war the most, besides Serbia, was France. Most of the Western Front took place in northeastern France and Belgium, and during 4 years of fighting, 1,377,000 French soldiers gave up their lives in defense of their country, along with 340,000 civilian fatalities. This represented a loss of life for 4.3% of the entire French population, but many, many more were wounded. 4,266,000 additional French soldiers were wounded or maimed by the war, representing a total casualty amount similar to Russia's, but from a much smaller population. In total, around 15% of France's population became a casualty during the First World War. A horrible.
This is what you need to study if you want to learn why France's World War II participation was, in the very beginning, meek, okay, from the officer side. Even the population on the civilian side. There is a lot you can learn from just looking at these numbers. It tells you why they wanted to use defenses. It tells you why they were very apprehensive of changing plans, why they were apprehensive of going into another world war. The amount of people, so again, the dead is astronomical for France. The wounded even more so. Of these wounded, a lot of them, again, depends how badly they're wounded. If they're missing their eyes, they're missing legs, limbs, they really can't work. And these are the ones that survived, let alone the ones that died. And again, France's World War I performance, you can attribute it to they were fighting on their home soil and they were not going to give up. Now, we all make the joke that France surrenders in World War II, okay? There's no denying that. But they were bled white in World War I, fighting for their home country, no matter the cost. Even the mutinies that happened in France in 1917, okay? Those mutinies, they did not want to attack pointless positions and die for nothing, even if it was their home soil. They did not get up en masse, and they did not, in general, they did not abandon their positions. They were perfectly willing to sit and defend their positions in France because it's their home country, and they are fighting for their families behind them. So they would sit in their positions. They just wouldn't continue to attack. Now, we can go over the mutinies in more depth if you guys want, but just so you know, France is not a coward nation by far. They suffered enormously in World War I.
His population became a casualty during the First World War, a horrible loss of life that wouldn't be fully recovered 20 years later at the start of the Second World War. Other Entente countries in order of wartime casualties include Romania, which also suffered terribly at 10.4% of their population becoming casualties, as well as Greece.
Okay, let's talk about Romania here. In World War I, Romania suffered 10.4% casualties, 665,000. Romania single-handedly could have swung the entire war into the Entente's favor. However, they came in at the wrong time. The Brusilov offensive that was happening just before Romania entered, that offensive, with all the problems that it had, almost broke the Central Powers, and it broke Austria-Hungary's ability to do any offensive for the rest of the war. That single offensive, you change two things, or one of these, whatever one you want. The two generals in the northern sector actually listened to Brusilov and commenced their attack. World War I is over, and the Entente are victorious. The other is you have Romania enter when the Brusilov offensive is going in, and is winning, and they join, and Babadabupi, Austria-Hungary, is completely knocked out of the war. Romania joined after the Brusilov offensive, and after Germany was able to consolidate all the Austrian-Hungarian forces on the Eastern Front, and they were able to completely smash Romania and take all of their resources. This is an unfortunate fact, but
percent of their population becoming casualties, as well as Greece, Belgium, Portugal, Montenegro, and Japan, with
Belgium was really hurt by World War One. Okay, you cannot underestimate this 134,000 casualties they took. They, in World War II, long story short, this affects them in World War II. And as my viewers pointed out, the opinion of the king in World War II is not very high, which makes sense because he withdrew them from their defensive alliance with France, which would have saved them in World War II, or at least bought them a lot more time, okay? Belgium learned the hard way in World War I that being neutral doesn't mean anything if you can't back it up. And they lost most of their country and had to fight for it tooth and nail all the way back. Greece is one of those cases where you could do a whole you could just be a whole expertise just in this area during World War I, between the monarchy and the prime minister and the republican elements that were happening in Greece at the time, with the prime minister wanting to support the Entente, with the king of Greece wanting to support the Central Powers. Eventually, the prime minister gets his way, is able to declare war on the Central Powers, and Greece suffers pretty high casualties, okay, for their participation in World War I. They had a lot of French and British help, too, along with the remaining elements of the Serbian army that are able to actually regroup there. Montenegro suffers 8,000 casualties. They basically came in with Serbia to try and help them. And again, these guys got pushed back out to the sea and had to retreat. Portugal had an alliance with the United Kingdom, and this goes back all the way to really the 14 or 1200s. And they have been in an alliance ever since, besides World War II, which we can get into. And Japan also contributes, but they really support they give a lot of material lend-lease to Russia during the war, and also take a lot of German colonies. They actually make out pretty well for their casualty count out of World War I. Greece technically gets land out of World War I and then loses it in the intra-war years, but that's beyond the scope of this video.
with only about 1,000 casualties during the entire war. But now let's take a look at the other side.
As I said, Japan basically just gave a whole bunch of equipment to the Allies, medical support staff, and also got all of Germany's colonies basically in the east, most of them.
Germany was fighting on two fronts for most of the war and also suffered cataclysmic losses. 2,037,000 of her soldiers died fighting in the west and the east, and 594,000 of her civilians died largely due to starvation caused by the Allied blockade of the country.
This is very important to remember. Let me see. This book, okay? Let me see. The Weimar Republic sourcebook, okay? If you want to know how badly, these are all primary and secondary, well, really, these are all just primary sources from the time, okay? If you want to understand why Germany does a lot of their really weird things and idiosyncrasies in World War II, it is because of this. The starvation that affected Germany was so bad Again, the stab in the back myth, which I could make a whole actual video about, with Hindenburg. They say the civilian population stabbed them in the back, more specifically the Jewish German population. That is not true in the slightest. German Jews fought very hard for their country, the German Empire, really, in World War I, and they were not recognized for it. There were soldiers that would defend them in the Weimar Republic. Again, I would point you to the source book. They immediately countermanded this and said, that is not true. There were Jewish newspapers that also said, that is not true. But the starvation of the German population from the blockade is going to affect a lot of the thinking during World War II. For example, butter or guns, right? Germany always chose butter for the people to keep them happy because they were worried about the stab in the back myth, right? That's why German civilians in World War II were actually were one of the most well-fed in Europe, but they took all the food from really everyone else.
Another 2.5 million German soldiers were wounded during the course of the war, amounting to 7.8% of Germany's population becoming a casualty.
7.8% may not seem like a lot, but it is absolutely devastating, okay? Now, this is for the empire. This is not for the empire after it is broken up, okay? And it becomes the German Reich with a lot of territory lost. So this number is what it was at the empire time, and then it's completely goes to Poland again, all the countries that are created, Czechoslovakia, you lose Bohemia out of this. And then the number goes a lot higher, and this is a lot to lose in World War I for basically backing up your ally. On top of, I don't know if we'll get into this, on top of the fact, Germany could have dealt with this, okay? They could have said, as long as they were treated with fairness, as long as you can give it to them, and they were not blamed for World War I, this is bad, but it is acceptable. The fact that they were blamed for starting the war when they clearly were not the ones that started it. Austria-Hungary sent their ultimatum to Serbia. Serbia rejected it, and that's what started the war. Germany might have given Austria-Hungary a blank check to start the war, but that does not mean Germany is responsible. That will, again, I'll point to the source book again. This, the fact that they were blamed in the Treaty of Versailles specifically, not Austria-Hungary, is what will get a lot of people mad, which you know what that leads to.
While Germany suffered the highest raw numbers of the Central Powers' casualties, she didn't suffer the highest percentage-wise. While Austria-Hungary took less casualties overall, they represented a higher proportion of that empire's population, 10.77%. Over 1.3 million soldiers were killed and another 3.6 million injured, all of which helps to explain why the Austro-Hungarian Empire itself wasn't able to survive the war. But the worst suffering on the Central Powers side occurred inside of the Ottoman Empire.
Okay, I know what he's going to say about the Ottomans before we get there. Austria-Hungary took a lot of casualties, and they were not, I'll just give it very point blank to you, they were not very effective in World War I. There's many reasons as to why. Language barriers, officers, there's a whole thing you could go through. But they paid a significant price for what they got destroyed out of this war. And it's important to remember that they did participate in the war, and they did, the soldiers, again, of all nationalities, you have everyone in this. You got Hungarians, Croatians, you got Serbians, you got everyone in this empire, okay? You got some Austrian Germans, you got some Italians, you got Polish people. They all served in the Austrian-Hungarian army, okay? It's important to remember those people, okay? This isn't a black and white war like World War II. Everyone has a reason for going to war. It's just this this war isn't, again, as I say, black and white. You can't just unanimously say that Austria-Hungary and Germany, are completely blamed for this. No, there's a lot of factors that led to this incident happening. Okay, but if you all narrow it down, Austria-Hungary is the one that made the unreasonable demands. However, their heir was shot by a Serbian that was a member of the Black Hand. Again, not saying any side was 100% the one you blame. There's a lot of contributing factors, but Austria-Hungary sending an ultimatum to Serbia is what definitely kicks us off.
The war, but the worst suffering on the Central Powers side occurred inside of the Ottoman Empire, and most of it was self-inflicted. The Ottomans joined the war in 1915 and suffered 548,000 military fatalities, and another 582,000 wounded fighting against mostly the British, French, and the Russians. But absurdly high civilian deaths inside of the Ottoman Empire were largely due to the Ottoman government's policy of ethnic cleansing against her Armenian, Greek, and Assyrian ethnic minorities. Collectively known as the Armenian Genocide, 1.5 million Armenians were systematically killed by the Ottoman government during and shortly after the war, along with 600,000 Greeks and 225,000 Assyrians.
There are some villages in Turkey today, the modern country of Turkey, that had Greek villages that are completely empty today. They're still there, and they are completely empty and abandoned that used to have a Greek population there. Again, this Armenian genocide, again, basically, I don't really know what this accomplishes. You're ethnic cleansing your own people to what? You're just from a military perspective, without getting into the moral absolute depravity that this is, which again I completely condone. This, you don't do this ever. This is genocide. It doesn't make any military sense either. Why would you shoot all of your own people? It doesn't. The Armenian genocide is not talked about enough. First of all, it's just like kind of like we forget about it, and it happened in the Ottoman Empire, and it should be remembered for what it was, which was the systematic killing of the Armenian people, the systematic killing of Greek people and Assyrians.
Accounting for all of this, in addition to the military casualties, an enormous 17% of the Ottoman Empire's population was killed or wounded during the conflict, which can also help to explain why this empire too didn't survive long after the war was over. And finally...
Okay, let's just talk about this. This number also, this reflects the World War I casualties. After World War I, the interwar period, again, the whole Turkey becomes a country. They had to fight tooth and nail, the British, the French, the Greeks, the Italians, everyone, to get their country back. And again, that war lasted a long time, okay? And they lost a lot of people in that too.
After the war was over. And finally, Bulgaria was another member of this alliance that suffered greatly as well, with 6.8% of their population becoming casualty victims of the Great War. In total, and across all countries, about 9 million soldiers lost their lives.
Okay, let's talk about Bulgaria here. 6.8% just for World War I. You have to remember that the Balkan Wars occurred before this. Bulgaria has been fighting before World War I around 10 years. So then you add another 4 on top of that. You're getting at 14 years of bloodshed because of a monarch, really. You could argue the first Balkan Wars against the Ottoman Empire. Fair enough. Second Balkan Wars against Bulgaria, because Bulgaria thought it was better than everyone and got wrecked. And then they came into the Central Powers to get their land back and got wrecked again. They lost a lot of people before World War I, let alone going into World War I. They were not a country that was stable enough or had the economic power to really do much besides lose in World War I, and they took enormous casualties.
In total, and across all countries, about 9 million soldiers lost their lives, as well as 7 million civilians. 36% of all deaths were Entente military, 22% were the Central Powers military, another 22% were Central Powers civilians, and the final 20% were Entente civilians. The First World War was, and still remains, the bloodiest war ever fought in the history of the United Kingdom, France, Italy, Belgium, Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, Turkey, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. The Second World War was...
Think about that. All those countries you just mentioned, they suffered more casualties in World War I, okay, than they did in any other... than in World War II. And World War II was bigger. They lost more. This is why it is important to study World War I. You can't just side note it. You can't just be like, oh, World War II is where we basically came from. No. if you want to study at least recent history in the 19th century, you need to study World War One and World War Two. They are very interconnected. Okay, and I feel like I should play this again just so we get the point home.
Fought in the history of the United Kingdom.
Let's go back.
Bloodiest war ever fought in the history of the United Kingdom, France, Italy, Belgium, Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, Turkey, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. The Second World War was actually not as bad for all of these mentioned countries, but it would be worse for others like Russia and Germany.
And that is true. That was a total war of annihilation between the Soviet Union and Germany.
Hopefully, after 2 terrible lessons during the 20th century, humanity will never forget what can happen when we let our differences get the better of us. Lessons of any kind are valuable for both societies and for individuals. And if
it's unfortunate that the Ukraine war is happening. Totally. And this is obviously made before Russia decides to go invade a sovereign country to get his land back as it sees it, and the Ukrainian people have to fight to exist.
If you made it all the way through this video to here, it's clear that you enjoy learning. So why not learn even more about anything you want to by going over to Skillshare next? One of the most common questions that I get asked all the time is how I got started making these videos. And the first step was learning the required skills like researching, writing, audio recording, and editing. For all of these skills though, there's a course offered on Skillshare.
I recommend you actually check out Skillshare if you need... If you cannot afford university, okay, and you want to, if you don't know how to do sources and stuff, there are good courses on there that I recommend you would check out.
An online learning community with more than 20,000 classes on whatever it is you want to learn. The sheer variety of classes you can take is incredible. You can learn skills to help you make videos, build a good-looking website, or cook a delicious meal, and there is so much more. There's even amazing classes taught by my YouTube friends Mike Boyd and the team behind Kurzgesagt. But the best part about all of this is that the first 500 people to click on the link in the description or by going to skl.sh/reallifelore18 can try Skillshare entirely for free for 2 months. Skillshare is a great supporter of this channel and they help make these videos possible, and it's a great place to learn, so please do make sure to go ahead and check them out. Thank you, and I'll see you again next week.
He also turned off ads for this video just so that everyone is aware, and I will try to honor that. Again, I'm a small channel. I don't have control over monetization, but at some point, which we should be close, I will turn off all monetization on this video. Because he turned off monetization, and I feel it is respectful to that creator. So I will end the video there saying that if you want to study human conflict in both World War II and understand a lot of the reasons why a lot of countries do certain things in World War II, World War I is the example that I would tell you to take a look at. They're very interconnected between each other. So after that, hope you guys enjoyed my commentary on this video, really, and I hope to see you again soon. So other than that, have a good rest of your day.